Entertainer Jussie Smollett's staged hate crime saga closed another chapter this week with his sentencing after being convicted in late 2021. If for some reason you are tuning in right now and you have no idea what this is or what happened, stay until the end where I will link you to my previous episode on this with a little bit of background on what the whole situation is and what's going on. But Jussie this week was sentenced to 150 days in jail and $145,000 total in restitution and fines to the city of Chicago. But the occasion was not without drama. And we will get into that right now, plus my reaction. Before sentencing was read aloud by the judge, his full remarks really laid into Jussie of how much of a lapse in judgment this entire thing was/still is, falling just short of calling Jussie a disgrace of a human being that should be thrown aside like a piece of garbage to never be seen again, until the end of his comments where the judge came around to acknowledging the population of people fighting for criminal and social justice reform in America in honest ways, unlike what Jussie did in this case. We then get the sentencing, followed by the judge asking if anyone has any comment, where Jussie then stood up to further plead his innocence with all due respect to the judge. Remember, this is after the entire initial circus of the incident, followed by many high-ranking influential people believing him and supporting him being charged after messes involving Chicago law enforcement, a jury trial where he was found guilty, and now a sentencing. He then continued to plead his innocence and clearly stated whatever happens to him behind bars is not self-harm. So, Emily D. Baker, one of my go-to legal YouTubers, Emily D. Baker, I said that a little fast, sorry, was breaking this down a few days ago, indicating he may have been doing this in hopes it will ensure he is in kind of protected custody or away from the general population in jail. And I also saw others saying this may be him leaving an opening for some grievances later on should something happen to him while he's in jail to kind of garner some sympathy as a victim of some attack in jail, as another attempt to accomplish what the initial staged crime was supposed to do, which was garner support for victims of hate crimes. But as of today, this morning, it was reported he may be being held in the psych ward of the jail. So maybe this whole plea and this whole showing of him actually worked. But back to the day of the sentencing. So after some legal motions happened between Jussie's lawyers and the judge, he was walked out with his fist in the air and presumably processed and sent to serve time. But let's jump right into my thoughts/reaction as I was seeing this unfold and some more thoughts over the last few days as I've had time to reflect and simmer on this. So overall, I thought his reaction in the courtroom, Jussie's, after the sentencing was read, reeked of entitled, cringy, unwell, unaware, unremorseful self-pity, and I think proved the judge and jury of not only the court of law, but the court of public opinion, who wasn't in support of Jussie already, that they were right in this conviction and punishment, and maybe even convinced some of them that he should have gotten an even bigger punishment. Now, Emily D. Baker made a point also in her coverage last week to say this was barely, if even at all, on the scale of extreme outbursts in a courtroom as far as sentencing goes. And looking at it now, it does seem a little more cringeworthy than dangerous, as displayed by the actions of the officers around Jussie, who didn't really physically engage with him most of the time. But it was very wild to watch play out live on TV, because it's one of those things that you just don't know how it's going to escalate, if it's going to get any worse, or what his motive is, or what is he trying to do. Luckily, it didn't get too out of hand and just seemed more like an impassioned speech from an entertainer trying to cope with this news of him being in legal trouble for the next 6 months and then probably follow him the rest of his life. But in my opinion, this isn't really that big of a punishment for the benefit that Jussie will get out of it from a publicity standpoint. And knowing how many people of influence were on his side from the beginning that haven't really said much in light of the narrative taking a turn for the worse for Jussie as far as initial support for him and the facts of the case. So to me, The word exchange was the worst part for Jussie himself in the courtroom and the statements made by the judge as far as public opinion and any reputation at stakes go. The money and time seems to be the easy part for Jussie at this point. We'll circle back to the jail time in a moment from a jail safety perspective, but the fallout from this, I think, is going to be the worst part for Jussie if it continues to get coverage and Jussie continues to act out. But I think time will tell if this was worth it for Jussie in the long run for his career in the entertainment industry. But it is really hard to feel bad for someone who acts like this. The only way I can justify feeling bad for Jussie at this point is by treating him as a mentally ill person. I hope he gets help, and I also hope his family stops enabling him because he potentially is the spoon that feeds them. I think they should work on an exit plan from a financial standpoint, so when they are honest with him and potentially get cut off, they will be okay until Jussie comes around, or else they're all going down together at this point, pending he doesn't get another chance in the industry, which I think there's enough people supporting him to give him another chance. But the consumers will get to decide if those projects kind of become successful if he's in front of the camera. But I do think the biggest takeaway from the judge's comments were Jussie's initial stunt leading to the charges and conviction was supposed to help get justice for victims of hate crimes. But what ended up happening was planting seeds of doubt in real victims of hate crime stories. And from a criminal and social justice angle, there are certainly instances where an individual is the victim of the system by being wrongfully accused and wrongfully convicted. However, in this case, this was not one of those instances, and actually might have convinced some people who were on his side before maybe that the cause he was fighting for maybe isn't as just or as real as they thought. Now, as far as Jussie's time in jail, if he does actually get harmed in jail, which at this point, if he's in the psych ward, potentially no one will harm him. Maybe it'll be more harm to himself mentally by being in a mental institution, basically. Who is going to believe his story, considering he hasn't shown any remorse after clearly staging a hate crime and lying about it to everyone, basically? And if after an investigation were to happen and he's found to have self-harmed, after explicitly saying he wasn't going to do that, at what point does Jussie wake up and realize most of this was his cause and his fault, and not everyone else around him and the entire system coming down on him? Because at the end of the day, Jussie's the only one who has the power to change himself. And to me, his statements about not being in a state of self-harm was along the same lines as the evidence planting of the noose around his neck in the initial crime, where it was just too spot on for it to be real, if that makes sense. To me, his statements about self-harm also indicate he may actually be wanting to do something to himself, but use this statement of him saying he's not going to do that as an excuse to blame someone else, to kind of push that narrative of victimization of a black homosexual in jail, which, like I said before, was the original goal, but failed miserably once the facts came out. Now, sure, Jussie is concerned with jail safety, and I think many people in this situation would feel the same. But Jussie committed the crime. If you don't want to do the time, don't do the crime. I know that's a cheesy cliche, but it's kind of true. And at this point, he can only hope he makes it out okay and then commit to never going back to this place. So let me know what you thought of this, and head to the description of the video or tap or click the screen for my full Jussie playlist so you don't miss any past or future videos on this.